Well, Major Hurricane Milton is fastly approaching landfall later on this evening, but we're already seeing the impacts as early as this morning. You're taking a live look at Anna Maria, Florida, down on the western side of the Florida peninsula. Yes, look at how much the Skycam is shaking already, and you're definitely seeing some white caps along the waves and all of this heavy rain, along with a bunch of birds right now along the boardwalk right here where our sky camera is. So obviously, it may not be as intense as the winds are going to get associated with Milton, because the center of circulation is still a little bit offshore as of right now. But this is just the preluding impacts that we are really looking at associated with Milton, and we'll take a live look at where it is centered currently. So if you go directly kind of west southwest of Fort Myers, that's where you'll see that center of circulation way down here, and that's where the heaviest rain bands and the gustiest winds are going to be associated with this major hurricane. But also a tornado watch has been recently issued down here for the southern portion of Florida, from Tampa all the way down into the Keys, and in fact seeing 2 tornado warned storms in those tiny red boxes already within this box. So the impacts of Hurricane Milton are stretching far and wide. Almost the entire state of Florida covered in some sort of rain showers, thunderstorms, or even just some cloud cover. But the cloud cover is actually stretching even farther than the state of Florida. Here in central Georgia, we're starting to see some of those very high clouds, the kind of exhaust clouds, if you will, stretching into our area currently. And I did a little measurement earlier, about 500 miles away from the center of circulation. And this isn't even including the farthest that they are stretching along the Atlantic coast further up into South Carolina. So yes, a very, very large storm, and right now at Category 4 status. And you'll see the 10 a.m. advisory is in on Hurricane Milton. We're going to begin to get these advisories every hour now until Milton does make landfall, so we can get more up-to-date numbers. So winds are sustained at 155 miles an hour. And I want to note this is just 2 miles an hour shy of Category 5 status. So basically still treat this as a Category 5 hurricane, even though that number is 1 less. Pressure is up to 919 millibars, and it is moving northeast at 16 miles an hour. This is definitely an uptick from the past couple of days. It has been very slowly trekking across the warm waters of the Gulf of Mexico. But Milton has done a lot of flip-flopping over the past couple of days. It went from a Category 1 into a Category 5 in a mere 18 hours during a rapid intensification phase, and then it bounced down to a Category 4 yesterday afternoon. That was because it underwent what we call an eye wall replacement cycle, and it's exactly what it sounds like. You get a bunch of bands that are further away from that eye wall. They start to intensify. Those thunderstorms start to intensify, and they start to close in on the actual eye wall where the heaviest impacts are. Well, what that band of thunderstorms further out does, it kind of chokes out that eye wall, so that results in some weakening. So we saw Milton go all the way up to 180 mile an hour winds, pressure below 900 millibars, and then it weakened back into Category 4 status yesterday before that replacement cycle was complete. And then after that, it was allowed to re-strengthen into a Category 5. Well, now Hurricane Milton's running into what we call wind shear. And wind shear basically is just a disruption of all the synoptics that go into meteorology and within the atmosphere of this hurricane. So what that's going to do, it's going to allow the winds to continue to go on down before it does make landfall. But as you can see, all of these timestamps still forecasted to make landfall as a major hurricane of Category 4 status. And whether it's a Category 3, which the National Hurricane Center has been saying as of recent days, whether it's a Category 4 or a Category 5, that's not really the concern anymore, because the impacts are still going to be quite devastating and quite catastrophic no matter what category this is, because it is still a major hurricane. So when you hear people talking about weakening, that's a very strong term. It is still going to have the same impacts that we have had forecasted for the past couple of days. But going through the timing, so over the course of this afternoon, you'll see winds go down slightly, down to 150 miles an hour, and then upon landfall, somewhere slightly above 130 miles an hour, because you can definitely see this line right here is already over a good chunk of land. And we are expecting landfall sometime into the nighttime hours after the sun does set later on tonight. And then Hurricane Milton makes its exit of the state of Florida fairly quickly, but actually going back over the Atlantic Ocean still as a Category 1 hurricane, winds sustained of 80 miles an hour, and that's going to be sometime around Thursday afternoon before continuing out into the Atlantic Ocean. I'll move over to the other side so you can see it. And then once we get on into Friday morning and Friday afternoon, Milton will continue to weaken into a tropical storm and then eventually a remnant low pressure center that you do see over there on the right side of the screen. So taking a look at our watches and warnings, these are stretching far and wide all across the state of Florida. So everyone down on the peninsula of Florida in some kind of tropical storm or a hurricane warning. So this pink color that you do see at the bottom, that's going to be your hurricane warning, and the tropical storm warning is going to be this red color that you do see. So basically, that's just a little bit difference in the force of the impacts. And the force of the impacts, I mean wind speeds. So everyone in that pink category, winds of 74 miles per hour or higher, which definitely looks to be the case on the higher end, obviously, with the sustained winds of Milton right now. Those are expected within the next 36 hours, and not even just up to 36 hours. We're really looking at more of a 12-hour window for areas in western Florida. Areas in the tropical storm warning, that's going to be winds of 39 to 73 miles per hour. Those are the tropical storm force conditions that you can expect within the next 36 hours. But then you see this yellow box, and that's just a tropical storm watch. That means it's just kind of expected within the next 48 hours, and the confidence isn't as great as that warning. But I want to note that even though Milton is impacting Florida, making landfall in Florida, exiting Florida, it's still extending these watches and warnings further up the Atlantic coast, along the Georgia Atlantic coast, the South Carolina Atlantic coast, encompassing areas like Jacksonville, down in the northeastern portion of Florida, Savannah, Georgia, and all the way up into Charleston, South Carolina. So like I said, widespread impacts. Don't really pay attention to the cone and think, oh, okay, I'm not in the cone, I'm not going to see those most severe impacts. You are going to feel the impacts far and wide, and those watches and warnings are a really good depiction of that. Now taking a look at our future view model about how Milton does really make landfall, where does that center of circulation go over? And right now you see this is Wednesday at 8 p.m. and kind of hard to get an actual picture because Milton does lose some organization, but that's also going to cause an increase in the wind field and spread those impacts farther up to the north and farther down to the south. But around 8 p.m. you can definitely see these wind arrows really start to take a little oval shape right there, and that's just off the coast right there on the Tampa Bay area around St. Petersburg and Tampa, Florida. After we go into the overnight hours, around 4 a.m. is when we're starting to see Milton finally enter the eastern portion of the state of Florida, and around the Daytona Beach area is where we're looking at that center of circulation. And then eventually Milton will exit, like I said, as we go throughout the afternoon hours on Thursday. So right now we're really looking at an overnight storm risk for the most severe impacts, looking at landfall sometime tonight just past the 8 p.m. hour. That timestamp you saw from the National Hurricane Center had 2 a.m. So obviously a good chunk of a window right there. I do believe landfall is more than likely going to happen sometime around 10, 11, or midnight tonight. So the good news is with the overnight storm threat, many of you are already in the safety of your homes, but hopefully many of you have heeded these evacuation warnings from your local officials and are not in your homes if you're in any of those areas that did have a mandatory evacuation. But some takeaways with Hurricane Milton as of this latest advisory, still a high in Category 4. Like I said, basically treat this like a Category 5 hurricane, and still going to be a Category 4 at landfall. And even though it's going to be a lower in Category 4 at landfall that is forecasted as of right now, still going to have the same severity of impacts, unfortunately, with devastating storm surge, very, very gusty winds that's going to damage many, many structures, along with heavy rainfall that can create even some inland flooding associated with the heaviest bands of rain in Milton. Impacts will be felt far outside that cone, so do not pay sole attention to that cone. That is all the path the center of the storm is going to take. You will still feel impacts outside of that cone. As I was noting, that wind field with Milton is continuing to spread on out further to the north and further to the south. And even if the category is lower, those impacts are still going to be the same. I cannot emphasize that enough because I've seen a lot of people talking about weakening, and weakening has a positive connotation to it in this aspect. So even though it is going down in terms of some of the severity of the sustained winds and maybe in terms of the pressure starting to grow, it is still going to have the same devastating impacts with all of those storm surges, all of those very gusty winds that can damage properties, and also also the heavy rainfall amounts, and continuing to see that tornado watch, some of those tornado warned storms, the spin up tornadoes on the dirty side of the storm. We're already starting to see those impacts, so definitely want you to stay weather aware throughout the next 36 hours while Milton does make its way through the state of Florida.